everyone. As Jennifer kindly said, my name is Abbas Lightwalla, and I'm the Director of Global Legal Policy at IFPI. IFPI represents the record industry worldwide with over 8,000 record label members across 70 countries, including across Southeast Asia. Today, I'm very happy to be able to present on the impact of AI on the music industries. So the good, the bad, and then the frameworks that are needed to ensure the responsible and sustainable development of AI for the industry. As a starting point, it's worth pointing out that the music industry has been at the forefront of technological change, from vinyl to CDs to the shift to digital and now streaming. The development of AI is really just the next chapter of that innovative development. In fact, the music sector has already started to use artificial intelligence responsibly and in order to enhance human creativity. In fact, AI has been used as a tool in the creative process in music for years and years, and actually continues to be. And I think the point is that AI can be used beneficially across the whole creative workflow, from composition through to consumptions. And artists and right holders have embraced the potential, but only where it's used correctly and in order to enhance rather than replace the creative process. In fact, this embracing has also extended to generative AI in the last year or so. Artists and their record labels were already exploring how they can use or partner with generative AI services to enhance artistry. So, for example, you have projects, generative AI projects, from the likes of Sony Music with David Gilmour from Pink Floyd and The Orb. You have Universal Music partnering with YouTube to see how they can work together on new musical projects. And you have the likes of Warner Music doing a project with the French artist Edith Piaf and her estate for a new film about her life. So we can be super clear. AI is not bad in itself. Rather, it's the irresponsible use of AI with no regard for existing rights of third parties and getting authorization for that use of rights that is the problem. And so, unfortunately, amidst the positive use cases, we also see some really bad actors in this space. And that leads us to the first major issue we see in the music landscape: unauthorized generative AI. The thing is, high quality content is one of the key ingredients of high quality generative AI systems, and it's up there with technical talent and computing power, in which AI companies invest vast sums of money. At the same time, and despite doing so, many generative AI developers are training their models with large amounts of copyright protected content, including musical works and sound recordings, without authorization from and payment to right holders. And that's the case even though they generate outputs based on the very content they ingest, including when that output competes with the material actually used to train the model. Now, as we've seen before with many technological developments over the years, technology is actually not the problem. Generative AI in itself is not the problem. The problem is the misuse of technology in ways that doesn't respect the existing rights. And as you'll see from this slide, the legal uncertainty around this and the lack of respect for rights has already given rise to litigation in a number of jurisdictions. In addition to broad unauthorized generative AI, the music industry has also faced another problem: the proliferation of unauthorized vocal clones. You basically have, and just to give a little bit of detail around how this works, you have a commercial recording in this example given, and we can send around the link to these later, the song Jolene, sung by Miley Cyrus. Now, an AI tool is then used to split the recording into a vocal track and an instrumental track. That vocal track is then taken and put through a vocal model, which has been trained generally without authorization. So in this case, on Beyonce's music, so that it can synthesize Beyonce's voice. And that vocal track is then manipulated to sound like Beyonce instead of the original Miley Cyrus. It's then added back into the original instrumentals to generate the new AI-powered cover. Now, this gives rise to a number of legal issues. You have the use of recordings to provide the underlying instrumentals, which involves reproduction, and is therefore infringing where it's done without permission. You have the use of recordings, even if split into just the voice, to train an AI tool. That's again reproduction and infringing where there's no authorization. And at the end, when you have the final output, in addition to the infringement of copyright, you also have the potential infringement of certain personality rights that exist in a number of jurisdictions. Now, that's just one small insight into one example of the activities that we're seeing. When you break it down, you see that IP is actually very relevant and provides the means to stop a number of these problematic uses of AI. And this particular problem, the vocal cloning, is particularly problematic as we've seen websites out there already offering to provide vocal cloning facilities powered by AI for users to clone our member companies' artists without any authorization having been obtained for the use of the recordings to train the model. It's also, as we've seen, used by criminal scammers to profit. For example, the Frank Ocean pre-release track that was put onto the internet and sold to fans turned out to be a fake AI-generated track. So there is a real potential for consumers and fans to be abused where this technology is used without responsibility. And worth saying on this point, the problem extends much further than the music industry. As everyone listening will have seen, deepfakes not only impact artists, but they impact politicians, celebrities, athletes, public figures, and even just the general public. Unfortunately, to compound the issues that arise from these unlawful uses of AI, it's also currently very difficult to simply exercise and enforce these fundamental rights because of how non-transparent AI model developers have been in recent years. So, where does that leave us? As demonstrated earlier in the presentation, the responsible use of AI based on authorization can be an incredible tool. The music companies have already been using AI in order to actually use AI responsibly. However, failure to comply with the law in the digital age is not a novel issue. The problem here that we have is the large-scale ability of AI models, in particular generative AI, to ingest, copy, and appropriate protected content. And that's what gives rise to new issues. It's the actual ability to exercise and enforce rights to stop these irresponsible uses. So what needs to happen to ensure that the music and other creative ecosystems can actually develop while also providing a responsible legal environment based on legal certainty where investment and innovation can happen? There are some key elements that need to be followed to make sure that proper compliance with and enforceability of copyright and other rights in legal frameworks can happen. These are set out on this slide. Going through them briefly and beginning with the first. The reality is that copyright law is actually clear in most jurisdictions that reproductions of copyright protected content is a central act of copyright infringement as prescribed in the key international copyright treaties. The number of acts that I've described when it comes to both large generative AI models and also vocal clones involves a number of these acts of reproduction and are therefore licensable and authorizable. What's needed, however, given the existing rights are already there, is the robust adherence with this clear copyright norm. And in particular, that any deviations to this norm have to comply with and be interpreted through the three-step test set out under the WIPO treaties and the TRIPS agreement. And this makes clear that acts cannot be exempted from copyright in the situations described in this presentation, given that they won't be limited to certain special cases which don't conflict with the normal exploitation of the protected content at hand and don't unreasonably prejudice the legitimate interests of the right holder. These are clear tenets of the three-step test, and it's core to copyright law and the protection of creators and right holders. So we shouldn't have any deviations to this copyright norm that you need to get authorization to use copyright content to develop and use AI models. The second point on the slide, requiring record keeping and disclosure by those involved in the AI development and deployment chain. And this will be a fundamental tool to facilitate the enforcement and licensing of rights. Now, as described, copyright rules are generally robust enough. The problem is for right holders to know whether or not their rights have actually even been used by these AI models. And so robust and meaningful record keeping and disclosure is fundamental, simply to allow right holders to uphold their existing rights and exercise them effectively. The third point, it has to be possible to take action to prevent use without authorization of an artist's voice, their image, their name and likeness. As described, AI cloning without authorization is simply not acceptable. And the number of services offering to do that, nevertheless, are expanding. And this is a critical problem for artists. It puts words into the mouths of artists that they would never choose to say, and it trades on their reputation and their fan base for commercial purposes. But also not only damaging commercially, they can really harm an artist's reputation and their image, as well as deceiving consumers. So it's a clear tenet in that point 3 that there must be the ability to stop this kind of activity. The fourth guideline for a responsible framework is that works and sound recordings solely generated by AI with no human creativity should remain without copyright protection. Copyright protection exists to reward human endeavor, and solely AI-generated content is a different kettle of fish. It's also important that this kind of solely AI-generated content is labeled as such so that it can be distinguished from artistry by genuine human artists. The final point on this slide, preventing forum shopping and AI laundering by third countries with inadequate or unclear protections. Now, it's going to be incredibly important that countries don't allow for the free and unfettered use of copyright protected content to develop and train AI models. Otherwise, this will, for all intents and purposes, give rise to an incredibly challenging enforcement problem where activities that would be infringing in the majority of countries simply take place in jurisdictions where bad actors can claim that their activity is not unlawful before bringing either the trained model or the content itself into that country that has more robust rules. It's therefore going to be really important for adequate standards to be maintained in all jurisdictions and for any attempts to circumvent this or to get around the rules to be prevented. Worth saying, it isn't just us on the music industry side that believes in these positions. IFPI performed one of the biggest surveys in the world on music consumer habits, and that found some really clear findings. 2/3 of those surveyed agreed that music should not be used by AI providers without right holder permission. 2/3 also agreed that AI should not clone music artists or generate impersonations without permission. And finally, close to 2/3 also believe that AI providers should list any music they have used for training. So we know what's happening in terms of AI development, and we know the framework that's needed. How are these frameworks developing globally? I'll start shortly with the EU and the AI Act, in light of the fact that this first in the world of its kind regulation is going to be adopted in a week's time. The AI Act, as many will have heard, is a broad horizontal instrument that provides the copyright industries with tools to ensure that they can manage their rights effectively in this new generative AI world. There are a number of key provisions in here worth pointing out. First, the AI Act confirms clearly that where a right holder has reserved their rights in an appropriate manner, AI model providers need to obtain authorization from right holders if they want to carry out text and data mining over copyright protected content. It makes really clear the use of copyright content by AI models is an authorizable copyright act. Second, the AI Act introduces an obligation on certain model providers to retain technical documentation relating to the development of the models and to make available a sufficiently detailed summary of the works used for training, and that is explicitly set out as being in order to facilitate parties with legitimate interests, including copyright holders, to exercise and enforce their rights under EU law. This really addressed that problem of just simply being able to enforce your existing rights. Next, the AI Act also introduces an obligation on certain model providers to put in place policies to comply with EU copyright law. And this is regardless of where they acquired the data or trained and developed the model. And this is explicitly set out as being to ensure a level playing field among model providers where no provider can gain a competitive advantage in the EU by simply applying lower copyright standards, having taken their model elsewhere to train them in, for example, jurisdictions with more relaxed copyright rules. It's a really important provision that makes sure that all markets stay at a good, robust level of copyright protection and that no incentive is given for lowering those protections. The next point, the AI Act also introduces an obligation to label and mark deepfakes and synthetic AI-generated content. And final point, again, already mentioned, but it's worth pointing out that the general application of the obligations in the AI Act apply irrespective of whether those providers are established or located within the EU or in a third country, as long as those models or content is brought into the EU market. It's a really important point. There are also a number of other positive developments it's worth very briefly highlighting aside from the EU. So in the UK, over the last couple of years, there was a proposal for a very broad text and data mining exception. But after a lot of review, a lot of consideration and discussion with different industries, the government was convinced to abandon it and then, in fact, published some very positive findings on the fact that actually overbroad TDM exceptions simply aren't necessary, and that both the AI and culture industries can actually flourish without introducing them. We also have China, which had a number of consultations on generative AI in the last couple of years, and which has now enacted some of the most robust IP measures on generative AI in the world. You also have the likes of India, where ministries have already started to confirm that the use of copyright works to develop AI models requires copyright authorization. And finally, you have positive multilateral progress, such as with the G7 and the G20 and the OECD, which recognizes the importance of respecting IP rights and transparency, which are all welcome steps and shows that this is being looked at a global level, that it's really important to respect IP rights. There's also a lot of litigation happening. Now, I won't delve into this slide for too long, given the time restrictions, but worth mentioning that alongside the policy developments, we're already seeing litigation around AI. What's most notable, I think, is that the majority of costly litigations are taking place where there are open-ended fair use exceptions, so the US being the main example. I think this really demonstrates the importance of having clear legal frameworks in this area that enable the exercise and enforcement of rights by right holders. Now, I could discuss AI for many more hours or even days, I think, and I'm sure we will as a group, but at this point, I'll wrap up on the core point for the music industry, which is really that generative AI can be a great opportunity for copyright and for the creative industries, but it could also genuinely amount to an existential threat. And what we really need to do as industries and policymakers around the world is to make sure that legal frameworks aren't compromised in any jurisdictions, and we make sure that existing rules are clear and adhered to, and that the tools are in place to ensure that this can happen. Thank you. Very happy to take questions now or to be emailed with any follow-up questions. Thank you.